Martin, in the last lecture, you talked about we talked about accents, and you said that's an issue, but a far greater issue is linguistics. And so my first question is, what is linguistics?
Oh, it covers a whole range of sins. It's things like the phrasal verbs, about jargon, about slang, about dialects, about how you say things, about the grammar. I'm not going to go into grammar because I hate grammar and I've had enough of grammar actually. But I think just the various things that foreigners find problematic in English. Grammar is always a problem, but I think these things are the things that we need to be most aware of.
So are we talking about words that I might... Well, here's what you reminded me of. In my previous life, I was a store manager in a grocery store. And of course, I would have 300 employees, and every once in a while, a bunch of them would come up and say, "Mr. Patton, what do you want me to do?" And I can recall once being in the middle of the sales area with 5 of my employees and giving them all directions. And as they all rushed off to do their work, this lady had been standing behind me, and she came up to me and she says, "I know that you were speaking English, and I know that everybody you spoke to understood what you said, but I didn't understand a word that you said," she says. And that was when I realized that my grocery store in the chain of grocery stores had our own language. We had our own lingo, and we used it as a shortcut of communication so that I didn't have to go into this big, long explanation. It was just, and I can't now even remember what it could possibly have been, but she obviously was listening very intently, was totally fluent in English, knew that I was speaking English, and had no clue what I told everybody to do.
Yes, it's like when I first started working with business people, and they were talking about KPIs, and I was like, KPIs, yep, KPIs, and this was before Google, and I was thinking, what is a KPI? And I didn't want to sound stupid and ask people, but at the same time, I was just thinking it must be important because they say it every other sentence. But yes, jargon can be a big problem. I mean, not just for foreigners.
Okay, what is KPI?
KPIs, key performance indicators.
Key performance indicators. Okay, I wasn't going to let you just drop that on us and not tell us what it was.
But you put me on the spot then, because for a second my mind went blank and I thought, oh no, I've forgotten already. But yes, that's something else. It's
right. So we shorten up words into letters.
Yes, acronyms like that or KPIs, and also sometimes some acronyms have different meanings. So you can have the same acronym but with a different meaning. So again, that can be confusing. But I was thinking the thing that a lot of foreign students focus on is phrasal verbs. And one of the first problems with that is when a foreigner says to a native English speaker who hasn't studied teaching, "Oh, I don't like phrasal verbs," and the native speaker will say, "What are phrasal verbs? Are they something in your language?"
That's what I was just going to ask you. What is a phrasal verb?
Basically, it's where you put a verb has a few particles together, like, for example, to put somebody up. Meaning to accommodate somebody. So the basic Latin word is easier, just to accommodate somebody, but to put somebody up is a phrasal verb. It's where you can't understand the meaning from the components of the phrase. So put,
I see.
Somebody, and up. But when you put them together, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, it's like you're just putting them up there. Why would you put them up there? I don't get it.
Yes, so it's something that's students really focus on a lot because they find them very difficult. But when they come to talk to native speakers who don't know anything about the terminology of grammar, it can also cause problems. For example, my mother, when she was teaching, she was living in Germany with my father, and she started teaching English. And some of her German students said to her, we have a big problem understanding the gerund. And she was going, probably me too, because I don't know what it is, And what happens is that, again, something I'll talk about later, but students in a lot of countries learn a very grammatically based type of English, and they know the grammar and the structure. Well, in theory, they know the grammar and the structure, but they have no idea how to speak. And something like phrasal verbs are confusing for them because they're very common in spoken English, which they don't encounter very much. And
I see.
and also, you have all these old rules in English, like never finish a sentence with a preposition. The famous Star Trek, to boldly go. When nobody's got, and you can't say to boldly go. You have to say go boldly. And there's all these archaic rules that students learn, and then when they see a phrasal verb like that, they get confused and say that's wrong. You can't say that. You're not a native speaker because you say that as well. So phrasal verbs, yes, those are confusing because they're very.
So this is conversational English, is what we're talking about here.
Generally speaking, you can use them in more formal writing, perhaps. But again, the idea is that in writing you're more formal, and you would use the Latinate word like accommodate, and in speaking you would use to put somebody up. Right.
Okay, I understand. And then we've got jargon. So every industry has its own jargon.
Yes, and even for us, it's like you talked about the beaver's tail. So you were a skier on a particular mountain in Canada. How many other people in Canada actually know what a beaver's tail is? So you're a very small niche.
Only the skiers.
That's it. If you went into Quebec and said to a few people there, oh, I want a beaver's tail. And they were saying, oh, you like beaver's tails, you like meat, whatever. So,
well, we haven't seen a beaver in a while, but we'll go look for one.
Yep. And then the next thing is slang. Every language has a slang, and it can be very difficult. Again, talking about Cockneys, you have the famous Cockney rhyming slang, which I think English people use more as a joke to confuse foreigners than actually really use it. I mean, you have things like, you've heard about the Cockney rhyming slang?
Yes.
Like feet. Plates of meat. So the last word rhymes with something. So plates of meat is feet. Trouble and strife is wife. And people would say, oh, I'm going to see the trouble and strife. And foreigners would go, he's got a problem in his life? And so that's... But again, I think that's something that we use really just to play games with foreigners, not actually something that's very common. But again, slang in general, yes, it can be very problematic. And because it changes so often, as well.
Well, and as we find, like English in Canada across Canada is you've got different, because there's like people in Newfoundland and they talk to someone in Vancouver. We often don't understand them because they're actually turning into another dialect. And I think you see that across the UK and you see that across the States too, where sometimes you listen to some people and you go, they think they're speaking English, but it's certainly no English I've ever heard. So we've got these dialects that are starting to occur as well.
And even old dialects. For example, if you go to the west of England, in Cornwall, there's a lovely expression they have. They say, all right, my lover. All right, my lover. But also they say this to kids. Mothers say this to their children. And you're thinking, that's a bit weird. A mother saying to a kid, hello, my lover. But this is just the Cornish dialect, All right, my lover. It's a very lovely thing, and it sounds really nice. And in fact, I was on a bus once in London, and there was a Cornish bus conductor, and she was talking to the people on the bus, and she's saying, "All right, my lover, that'll be 6p," and the foreigners were like, "What?"
Oh, what a sweetheart!
Yes, and then also we talked a bit about slang being changing a lot, and there's also short-lived trends, like in the 90s you had like Michael Jackson with his song Bad, and bad became good, where people say, oh, that's bad. Right.
I'm bad, you're bad, we're bad.
Yeah, we're all bad, it's great. But again, for the older generation, it's like, what is this strange bad thing? We don't understand. And something that happens a lot now, particularly because of the internet and because we're all interconnected, is new words being coined all the time. And for example, you have things like Uberization of the economy, where because of the driving company Uber, where their business practice, where they employ people as self-employed and they pay them very little and they don't give many guarantees, and it's this new gig economy thing. So when you talk about the Uberization of society, it's where people are moving from regular jobs to little micro jobs or part-time jobs or freelance jobs. And you also, the before that, then, I mean, for my generation, we talked about Mac jobs. You know, these
Right.
really bad paid jobs in McDonald's or Burger King, you know, for where you'd get very low pay, unsocial hours, no guaranteed hours. So your manager might just phone up and say, "Oh, it's cancelled. Bad luck." So
Right.
yes, this is something that's happening a lot now as well. These new words, and even native speakers have problems with these, because if I talked to my mother about jobs and Uberization, she would have no idea what I was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got all these new, and particularly like with technology, we've got CPUs and we've got gigs and we've got RAM and we even iPhones and apps and all these words that certain people that are in that area are all familiar with it, but outside of that, and of course the people in it think everybody knows, and the people outside of it have no clue what it is that you're saying. And I can recall a couple times when someone asked me about a website and I rattled off all the things that they needed to do and fix, and they said, "Well, I didn't understand a word you said."
Yeah.
And then I realized, oh, yeah, I did it.
Yeah, and connected to that as well, you have things like emojis. You know, in different countries as well, people have different understanding. An emoji might mean one thing in Japan and a completely different thing in France, for example. And also you've got all the acronyms as well, like laugh out loud, lol, you know, and all these things. There's a new language emerging, which even native speakers have problems keeping up with.
Right. So there's a lot to keep up with if you're a non-native speaker and you want to be able to understand. You've got the company jargon, the company language. You've got the English language, and then you've got any dialects or slang or accents that come in to help make it more confusing for you.
Oh, yeah, and also there are knowledge gaps. We talked before about the culture, that you share a culture, it's easier to understand each other. So there are, for example, certain expressions in English that we leave hanging because everybody knows them. So, for example, if I said to you, "Scott, when you fail to plan..."
You plan to fail.
Yeah, or "when in Rome..."
Do as the Romans.
But if I say that to a foreigner, I say, "when in Rome," and they're thinking...
We're not in Rome.
We're not in Rome. Yes, exactly. Yes.
We're in this. When are we going to Rome? I didn't know we were going to Rome. What's that got to do with this?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, that's
Awesome.
linguistics. That's not.
And what can even bring in more confusion is when you get into generational differences, and that's what we're going to be talking about next.
Okay.